members of the public are kept up to date with the developments in relation to the steadfast resolution of our electricity challenges. This morning, the Minister is joined by colleagues from Eskom. He's joined by Mr. Kgosientso, who is the head of generation at Eskom. To his left, we have Ms. Stephanie Mukwena, Eskom's spokesperson. And to Ms. Stephanie's left is Mr. Silas Zimu, special advisor to the Minister. Colleagues, the Minister will kick us off with his opening remarks and his presentation, after which we will open the floor to questions from members of the media. Without any further delay, I wish to invite the Minister to the podium to proceed with the briefing.
Thank you very much, Tsakani, and good morning to members of the media and everyone who's watching back at home. Once more to express our gratitude and appreciation at the members of the media for taking time to provide coverage of the update. I think it's important because the media is an important interlocutor between us and the general public to allow us an opportunity to share with the South African public, business, households, the work that we are doing in the resolution of the energy crisis in the country. And we hope that this update is useful in allowing business to make the necessary and proper planning in relation to the outlook, but also simultaneously allow households also to make whatever arrangements that can be born out of this briefing in relation to the outlook. So today I'm going to take an opportunity to be a bit more elaborate in relation to some of the concrete steps that we are taking in relation to the various aspects of the Energy Action Plan. As you know, that the Energy Action Plan, as unveiled by President Ramaphosa in July of 2022, has got 5 outcomes. So I'm going to isolate about 2 of those outcomes and just share with the general public the work that we're doing and the kind of progress that has been registered in delivering on some of those outcomes, and by extension, a contribution towards the resolution of this crisis going into the future. The first one, as you know, the outcome emphasizes the need for us to ensure that we fix Eskom. And really that articulation derives from the fact that the shortest path to the resolution of the load shedding question is to ensure that we improve the performance of the installed fleet of Eskom. So, as you know, that we have been besieged by a number of challenges in relation to the performance of these units. And one of the actions that has been taken by Eskom under the stewardship of the head of generation, Mr. Kgosientso, is just the intensification of that relationship with our original equipment manufacturers to ensure that we are able to improve the availability of spare parts and expertise that comes from the OEMs. We already have contracts with them from a maintenance point of view, so there's a need for us to ensure that we strengthen that relationship. And really on the original equipment manufacturers, it's about 4 major players that are embedded in Eskom. And the head of generation is working with them in concert to ensure that in the power stations or the areas of their expertise, they remain engaged, and we don't go to a middleman to help us to resolve this question, because the performance of these machines or components of these machines are better understood by the original equipment manufacturers. So I'm talking about really the major units on your turbines and the boilers. We are intensifying that relationship. I'm saying intensification because that relationship has always been in place. And of course, at times there would have been some degree of disruption in that relationship, but with the arrival of Mr. Kgosientso and the stabilization of the management team at Eskom, we are going back to basics. So the team is ensuring that we are able to engage with the original equipment manufacturers. Just for the viewers back at home, to relate it much closer to your own experiences, just imagine that you have a car of, let's choose any make, let's say a Toyota, and it's giving you challenges. I'm sure you're not going to take it to a BMW dealership to fix it. You are not going to take it to a street mechanic to fix it, especially as it relates to major components. You are going to take it to a Toyota dealership, a workshop, for them to be able to fix that machine. Because first you might be under a contract, if you like the example of a car, you are still under motor plan. So it's important that you are able to exploit those legal responsibilities that derives out of that contract. So that's the work that Mr. Nxumalo is doing. And of course, consistent with that application, as I've mentioned before, we have identified 6 power stations that requires urgent and immediate attention because they are likely going to give us the best returns. And amongst them, Tutuka, Kendall, Kusile, Majuba are those that we think that will receive the best returns. But I must emphasize that this arrangement is across the entire fleet of Eskom and not just isolated to particular stations, but there are these stations that essentially over a period of time they've come across as being problematic, and therefore they require added attention. And the second area of intervention, outside that relationship with the original equipment manufacturers, because that is defined in the contract, is the need for us to ensure that we introduce a degree of speed and agility in the procurement and maintenance of these units. From the point of view of procuring the space, especially those that are outside those contractual obligations of the original equipment manufacturers. What is the problem we are solving here? The problem we are solving here is that the regulations, legislation that is applicable to a procurement environment in the public sector, the Public Finance Management Act, does elaborate on what is required when we want to procure goods and services. But we're saying that there are instances in the domain of Eskom, in this environment of Eskom, given the fact that we want to return the units as soon as possible, it is important that we are allowed leeway to ensure that we are able to procure with speed, and of course we are introducing some degree of flexibility. And let me also state that in the course of this arrangement, you don't want to undermine the credibility of the procurement process. By that I mean transparency, value for money, and competitiveness. So we're still going to retain those elements, but it's important that we create a dispensation that is bespoke to Eskom, especially given the current situation that we're facing. We can ill afford to have the units being out of service as a result of the lackluster nature of us procuring these spare parts. And what we want to do is that we don't want to do it on a case-by-case basis. What we are doing is to introduce a transversal arrangement. And Mr. Nxumalo, working with the National Treasury, are working on that. They are working on that because it's important that as we resolve these problems, we must not create other unintended consequences. You find that there are people with ill intentions who might exploit this dispensation, thinking that they can get away with it because we want to return the units into operation as speedily as possible. So that of transparency, competitiveness, value for money, those are the characteristic features that are non-negotiable. But it's important that we find a bespoke solution. And I'm happy to say that the National Treasury is assisting Eskom as we develop that procurement strategy, accepting that we are faced with an extraordinary crisis that requires extraordinary measures, some degree of innovation without going outside the parameters of what is acceptable. That is on fixing Eskom. And then you know that one of the outcomes of the Energy Action Plan is to ensure that we accelerate the investment by private sector on new generation capacity. We are able to accelerate, if you like, the rollout of rooftop solar solution by industry and also households, just on the issues around the acceleration of new generation capacity. So we have, working with the Department of Environmental Fisheries and Forestry, have designed, if you like, a dispensation that makes it possible for us to be able to accelerate the approval of environmental impact assessment. And in fact, a notice has been gazetted that excludes PV and battery storage projects from the requirement of environmental authorization. So what is the point we're making? The point we're making is that there are instances where there's a general consensus that the rollout of utility scale of PV, the rollout of wind turbines does not degrade the environmental value or aspects of that location. And we are saying that in that instance, where we know that there's a low to a medium environmental sensitivity, there's no need for you to go through, if you like, the full requirement of getting the approvals from an environmental authorization perspective. So it's important that we're able to isolate these areas, identify these areas, and exempt them from that requirement. And you'll know that one of the grievances or one of the issues that have been raised by private sector, amongst others, was the slow nature of the approval process in relation to environmental impact assessment. And from an investor community point of view, that can undermine, if you like, the commercial proposition of the projects that they are putting across, because time is money, just to put it in short. So it's important that we are able to accelerate that approval process. And I want to emphasize that in that acceleration of that approval process, it's not our intention to demean or degrade, if you like, the environment. Like I said, it's a sufficient application on the part of the DFFE to ensure that as we isolate or exempt those areas, we are not in contravention of the law, and we are not undermining, if you like, the ecological aspects, diversity of those areas, as we seek to ensure that we are accelerating the onboarding of new generation capacity. And then the other requirement is on the water use license. So there are environmental consideration, and there's also issues of water use license. And we know that over a period of time, these were taking an inordinate amount of time for them to be approved. We have truncated that process. The EIAs now are done within 30 days or so. The water use license approvals or considerations and the responses thereto are also done in a much more reduced period. So what are we doing in relation to the streamlining and or waiving water use license for renewable energy projects? So there's a general authorization that has been revised, and its intention is to accommodate, like I said, renewable energy application. And the Department of Water Affairs, as a custodian of this exercise, is reviewing and attending to the comments from submissions that have been received from the general public. So essentially, there's an intention in government to ensure that to the degree that is acceptable from the consideration of the water resources point of view, the extent to which the renewable energy projects do not have an adverse impact on those water resources. We don't necessarily think that we have to go, if you like, the full cycle of these applications for you to get the water use license, that we're introducing now a waiver. But of course, that will be considered within the national interest, and of course, the Department of Water Affairs, as a custodian of that if you like, a responsibility will advise. Like I said, we are now receiving submissions from multiple stakeholders. So it's important that in the quest to resolve this question of load shedding, we are able to introduce additional reforms without harming, if you like, other areas of government's responsibility of protecting the multiple interests that we find in this space. And then the other one is to ensure that we are able to accelerate the most advanced energy generation projects. Just as I stand before you, I'm happy to indicate that we have the pipeline of this energy generation projects have really increased, and now we're talking over about 120 projects. Like I've mentioned before, they are giving us the total megawatts of about 12,000 megawatts. So the point is that there's a need for us to expedite the applications for a new generation. So what we have done is that we are departing from the current arrangement. So a project developer will go to a number of departments, will go to DFFE to get the environmental impact assessment, the approvals, they lodge the application there, they lodge the application with the Department of Water Affairs for water use license, they lodge an application again with Eskom for grid access. So you can imagine there's a number of players there. So what we have done is to create a single window of entry, what we refer to a one-stop shop, so that project developers don't necessarily have that onerous responsibility of going to multiple departments. What they do is that they simply go into this platform and they are able to make these applications. And then a government will organize itself better behind that platform. So some degree of coordination, like it has been done through the advent of the Infrastructure Development Act, there's that coordinating mechanism to allow new infrastructure projects to be accelerated. So we're treating the renewable energy or new generation capacity in the same manner that we're treating the infrastructure project. So we're creating that single one-stop shop. Of course, Minister Patel, Minister of DTIC, has already launched that. So I think there has to be an appreciation that we're doing everything possible to accelerate the onboarding of new generation capacity. And then we did make mention that Eskom will also introduce a mechanism, what we call a standard offer program. So essentially going out to the markets domestically, internationally, to say those who've got excess generating capacity, please make it available to us at these tariffs. So it's a predetermined tariff, so we are offering to everyone across the board, make that possible. So when we started, we had a ceiling of getting about 1,000 megawatts. And that program has been oversubscribed. So it had a ceiling of 1,000 megawatts, and it was going to run for a period of 2 years. And we have found that that program has been oversubscribed. So what the team as Eskom has done is to go to the board and now seeking an approval. The approval is to make sure that we do two things. You remove the ceiling of 1,000, because once we get to 1,000, it means that we have met, if you like, the original intent of the program to procure an additional 1,000 megawatts. So we are increasing that ceiling from the megawatt perspective. We are taking it to 4,000. Of course, the Eskom board must still apply its mind, but that's something that has been put forward. And also to say that it's not necessarily limited to 2 years. So that's the work that we're doing. So we're seeing that there's an extraordinary amount of players who are coming on stream and saying that we can contribute to the resolution of this crisis, and we are offering the following. So that's the point that we are making on the standard offer program. And then the other area of attention is the one of the gas to power project. So you know that Richards Bay Eskom there is licensed to generate about 3,000 megawatts. Like I say, the EIAs are in place, and we know that they had been taken to court in relation to those approvals. I'm happy to say that the North Gauteng High Court has dismissed the challenge to the EIA. And also just to say that NERSA has clarified its decision on the ministerial determination for Richards Bay gas project and provided concurrence. So we've eliminated or taken out of the way, if you like, the legal challenge, and NERSA now has provided that concurrence. And as previously stated, Mr. Nxumalo is working full steam together with the team to ensure that we are able to exploit that resource. I'm confident that, as Minister Mantashe has mentioned before publicly, that the gas master plan will come out, and at the right time he'll make that announcement. So this must be seen as part of the totality of the interventions that we're making. As we are fixing Eskom in the short term, the shortest path to the resolution of this problem, I really want to give assurance to the country that we are really looking long term and introducing interventions that can make it possible for us to introduce new generation capacity from a multiplicity of fuel sources and players to ensure that we are not confronted with the same problem going into the future. And the other area of improvement, again, as part of our efforts to ensure that the state and by extension Eskom is a bit more efficient, a bit more focused in the manner in which we want to resolve this problem, is the reduction of the time frames for grid connection. Like I said, the issues around the cost estimate letters and also the budget codes for those who want to evacuate the electrons once they start producing, to ensure that we really have eliminated the backlogs between that period of November last year and February of this year, so that we're able to accelerate, if you like, the onboarding of a new generation capacity. So now we're looking beyond Eskom as part of an enduring a resilient solution to the energy crisis, and ultimately we're able to achieve energy sovereignty. And then the other major development that has got of tectonic proportions, I think this is significant because it's beginning to remake the South African energy landscape, is the fact that the electricity regulation amendment, the bill that we affectionately refer to as the ERA, has passed at the National Assembly and is now going to be considered at the NCOP. So what do I mean when I say that it's going to remake the South African landscape? So it does, one of the primary interventions it introduces there is to ensure that we make it easier to produce and sell electricity in South Africa. And in order to do this, then it establishes what it refers to as a transmission system operator, which is managed by the newly formed entity, wholly owned by Eskom, and by extension, wholly owned by the South African public, the National Transmission Company of South Africa. So that transmission system operator is a property of the state, is a property of the people of South Africa. What does it do, really? It does a number of things, and I really want to mention two of those. So what it does is that it ensures that all electricity producers are treated equally and fairly and are allowed access to the national grid on a non-discriminatory basis. So they are not going to discriminate. When you are ready, you want to evacuate the electrons, we have introduced a platform that makes it possible for you to do that. So on a non-discriminatory basis. And then the second one is that it enables a market platform through which electricity can be bought and sold by multiple players. So essentially, in addition to a non-discriminatory approach, it democratizes the space. So you are able to ensure that there's multiple sources that can generate, there's multiple buyers, and they are going to go through this platform to be able to procure that electricity. But most importantly, what are the benefits to the South African economy and the South African consumer? There are multiple, but I just want to mention a few of them. The first one is the lowering of the electricity prices. What do I mean by that? The introduction of competition, the introduction of multiple players. You are moving away from a monopoly. Of course, Eskom continues to be a dominant player. Eskom will continue to also play in new generation capacity, but there are also players that are coming in the space. And of course, the buyers will go and procure from the one that offers, if you like, the least cost. The tariffs are lower. So essentially, the net effect is that over a passage of time, once it becomes mature, becomes a bit more robust, you are likely going to see a reduction in electricity prices. And then the second one is the increase in reliability of supply. So as I stand before you, every time when we announce the stages of load shedding, the improvement in the supply, really the focus is primarily on Eskom and of course a few of the players in the space, the renewable energy players. But with the introduction of the reforms that I've just stated earlier on, the creation of this platform on a non-discriminatory basis, the democratization of both producing and selling, you are likely going to see that there's more players. The more players we have on the map, it means that there's more generation capacity and is able to stabilize, if you like, the supply, so there's increased reliability. The third one is that it offers choices to consumers or users. So it could be big industry. They can choose that they're getting from Eskom, they're getting from utility scale providers, they're getting from multiple providers, as long as they're able to enter into those private negotiation, they transact privately, the transmission system operator makes it possible for those electrons to be conveyed at an area of demand where these users are. So it's important that there's that appreciation. So we are introducing choice in how you are going to procure this new generation. And then the other one is that there's going to be increased investment. So I did talk about 120 projects, 12,000 megawatts, but with this democratization of the space, or non-discriminatory nature, that you can access the transmission grid. So it simply means that it is possible to have additional players on the generation side. And the more additional players we have, they're investing money, so we're able to increase investment in the energy generation space. And then the last one of the many that I want to mention is the fact that it's going to increase innovation and introduce efficiency. For you to survive as a new generator, as a new source of energy, you have to come at a price point that is better than the existing players. And for that to happen, it means that there has to be a drive in relation to adoption of new technologies. There must be a degree of innovation. And in doing that, you are able to make it possible for you to be more competitive and therefore to get more customers. So we think that is the remaking of the energy landscape in the country, like I said, is of tectonic proportions. I think it's something fundamentally profound that has been introduced as a result of this. And then on the operationalization of the National Transmission Company of South Africa. Remember, I make the point that the ERA, the Electricity Regulation Amendment, designates, if you like, NTC, the National Transmission Company, to be responsible for these actions that I've mentioned. Where are we now in relation to this? So the first one, there was we approved the assignment of the NTSA as a buyer for legacy contracts, cost recovery assurance, and amendment of IPP generation licenses. So what I mean by this is that when the IPPs were introduced in the space, the buyer was Eskom, but now we've introduced a new player in the family of Eskom. So really is amendment to those contracts to say that instead of reference just to Eskom, the reference is to the NTCSA. That's a really legal, if you like, correction. So you are sanitizing, if you like, that those contracts, because when they were entered into, the NTSA has not come into life, now it's come into being. So it's important that it's the one that is designated, and it requires that amendment. And I'm happy to say that all the 119 IPPs, the 119 IPPs have signed to this amendment, and then it's implemented. So they have accepted that we're no longer talking of Eskom at the group level, we are now talking the NTCSA. And then I'm happy to also to say that the National Treasury granted approval on the 28th of February to the NTCSA in relation to section 66 and 70 of the PFMA. What that does really in simple terms, it simply says that approval for the issuance of guarantees, indemnity, and or security or loans. So remember that that was sitting with Eskom, now is sitting with the NTCSA. That aggressive program of ensuring that we're investing in new transmission capacity, we're able to innovate, modernize transmission. NTCSA has to enter into a legally binding agreement. So it's important that the provisions of the PFMA does recognize the existence of the PFMA. So that also has since been attended to. And of course, we did also get consent from lenders. So remember that lenders had lended to this group called Eskom. So it's important that lenders give us consent to have an appreciation that we have introduced a sub-entity in Eskom, and therefore they must have comfort that to the extent that some of these obligations are tied to the transmission side of the business, they have comfort that this entity is in a position to meet its legal obligation. And that consent has been received from 7 lender groups to date, with engagement underway to obtain consent from 1 outstanding lender group. So really we're making significant progress. Out of the 8, 7 of those have acceded to that. So I thought it's important that we have this appreciation that there's additional work effort that is being made to ensure that we are able essentially to introduce new generation capacity, that there's no over-reliance just on Eskom. The introduction of these reforms are beginning to see practical traction. We're beginning to see the progress, and of course the measure of that progress essentially is in the number of megawatts that we were able to receive. And then as I conclude just on the performance of the generation fleet, now I'm isolating it to Eskom. Remember that I did make the point that the issues around the degree to which we are able to reduce the intensity of load shedding and its frequency is largely on Eskom side. And of course, the renewable energy players are playing a major role in that. So it's important that there's an appreciation that we are doing both. You are addressing base load, the performance of Eskom, and together with that, the onboarding of new generation capacity. So essentially what we are saying is that it's not a binary conversation. It's not about the EAF of Eskom outside what renewable energy providers can do. It's the totality of all of these things. So there's nothing called decoupling. There's nothing says there's renewable energy one side, there's Eskom one side. Let's see who outperforms the other. It's the aggregate of this mix that is going to help us to address this question. But of course, Eskom is a dominant player in that space, and it's important that we have an appreciation of where we are in relation to the performance. So you can see that the week that was just on the unplanned capacity loss factor and the partial load losses. The rate at which these units are failing on their own, essentially they are unreliable, and the lack of efficiency, so they are not running in instances where they have not failed but performing not at their design capacities. That's what I refer to the PLL. So when you put those together, we're talking about the unplanned capacity loss factor. So you can see that the weekly average, the 11th to the 15th, we're sitting at just shy of 15,000 megawatts, and now the past week we're at 14,600 megawatts. I think the point to be made here is that when we were during the December period, they were averaging about 13,000 megawatts. Of course, there's been some degree of deterioration on the UCLF relative to December, but relative to where we are in May, we are still better. It was 17,000 megawatts, and you can see that the past week we're at about 14,600 megawatts. We're 17,000 megawatts plus average during that baseline of May. So we're about 2,500 megawatts to the good. I know that Mr. Ngumalo and the team working very hard. This is an indicator that we really have to bring down. Remember when I talk about the EAF, really this is the one area, the partial load losses that requires attention, or essentially UCLF, is the one that we want to bring down. And of course, what Mr. Ngumalo and the team have done exceptionally well, and that effort is continued now by Mr. Marokani, and of course led by the board under the stewardship of Dr. Mteto. Like I said before, we had been very aggressive on the maintenance side. And when you measure that EAF, it's a combination of your UCLF and also your partial load losses, your planned capacity loss factor. And we know that the intention on the UCLF is to bring it down so you have less megawatts out on their own or failing and performing at optimal capacity. And then on planned maintenance, the more aggressive you go, what we have seen in the short term is that when these units come back, they are a bit more reliable, they are a bit more efficient, and that's what Mr. Ngumalo has done. When you look at what was the situation in May, when you look at this planned capacity, we're averaging about 3,120 and when megawatts. And when we look at the previous week, we're at about 6,500. So essentially an additional 3,000 megawatts that we have taken out to fix it. And you'll see that as we move into the winter period, the more colder days, we're going to bring down that planned capacity, planned outages. And as we bring down the planned outages, it means that we are ramping up on available capacity so that we are able to meet demand and you don't see the intensification of load shedding. So I thought that we must give you a sense, just in addition of what has been the performance the previous week, an appreciation that there is much more that we are doing just outside Eskom to enable new generation capacity so that we can secure a future that is more energy resilient, energy independent. If you like, we are able to attain energy sovereignty. It's a combination of a multiplicity of interventions, reforms, and ensuring that we are attracting greater levels of investment in the space, the introduction of the NTCSA, ensuring that we are onboarding a new generation capacity on a non-discriminatory basis. We are able to democratize the space. All of these actions, when taken together, are going to help us to ensure that the resolution of this problem is enduring. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. Colleagues, we will now open the floor to questions. We'll start with questions in the room, and we'll then take questions that have been shared on our online platform. By a show of hands, let's identify people who will ask questions. Please introduce yourself and the media house that you represent. We'll start with Heidi.
It's Heidi Jarvis from NCA. I just have two questions. Minister, you did touch on briefly about the winter period, but are you able at this stage to give us the winter forecast? Are we going to have a tough winter? Hopefully no repeats of last year. And then just secondly, could you give us an update on what the diesel budget looks like?
Thank you, Heidi. Do we have any more questions in the room? Okay, Batabile, will you be taking us through the questions? Okay, Itumeleng, please take us through the questions that have been shared online.
Thank you. It's from Helma, who's from Independent Media. The first question is, how many megawatts were saved during Earth Hour on Saturday? The second question is, when will Eskom get the next payment from Treasury? And the third question is, Duarte is one of the 12 top infrastructure projects. When is it due to be completed? And the last question is, will Duarte be part of the generation company or the transmission company? And the other one is from Denis Erasmus from Business Day. Please, will the minister share some details on the work that has been done over the last 12 months at the 6 priority power station that he referred to? The second question is, has there been improvement at the stations? The third question is, what generation capacity has already been recovered at each of the stations? And the last question is, what is the goal in terms of recovery at each of the stations by the end of 2024? And the other question is from Terence Creamer from Engineering News. What is the current uptake of the standard offer? What is the current state of the cross-border program? The second question is, when was the bondholder consent from the 7 letter groups officially received? Can you name the outstanding letter groups as well as those who have consented? Can the NTCSA be operationalized on the 1st of April without the final consent? And the last question from Terence is, with the IRP comment period having closed, can the minister outline what role he will have in the integration of many issues raised into the final vision? And could he also outline the process that will be undertaken and the likely timeframes? Thank you.
Thank you very much for those questions, colleagues. We will start with Mr. Begin-Ngumalo in response to some of the questions, and the Minister will take the rest. Thank you.
Thank you, Tsakani. Good morning to the media and viewers at home. I think let me start with the questions around the 6 stations, what has been achieved. I think if you recall, one of the stations was Kgosientso Power Station, where we were running 1 unit and it was also not running at full capacity. So at Kgosientso now, we have actually taken out Kgosientso from the recovery station because it's running exceptionally well, on average above 90% availability, which it shows that we have taken the lessons from Medupi, which has been consistently running at those levels, and we are seeing now the same at Kgosientso. So Kgosientso, as one of the stations, has now turned the corner. The second station is Majuba Power Station. Again, there, with the work that we have done, we've seen a significant improvement at Majuba in terms of reduction of partial load losses and also the number of trips on that plant. So that plant is running exceptionally well, so as Matla Power Station as well. So out of those stations, we have seen a massive improvement. The 2 stations that has not improved as we have expected is Kendal and Tutuga. But we understand why. Let me start with Tutuga. I think the work that we have to do now, we are starting now to commission those units at Tutuga. So in the next 2 months, we are going through major commissioning period. So we expect that Tutuga will start then performing much, much better than what has happened. Similarly to Kendal. Kendal, we understand the issues there. We are now also starting to commission the unit at Kendal. We are dealing with both the partials and also the unavailability. So I think also in the next 2 months, we are expecting Kendal to really get to the above 70s in terms of availability, above compared to where it's been operating. The last power plant is Duva Power Station. I think Duva has been doing exceptionally well, except for the boiler failures, but on average, Duva is on the right track. It is actually performing much better than it was a year ago. So maybe to add, the other station that we have added was the Kriel Power Station, which we're also seeing a good improvement as well on that. And then on the issue of budget, I've got the budget for the approved budget for the Eskom fleet, which is about 25 billion. We have managed to get additional budget on that. I think for the combined, I can just get that number of the total budget with the IPPs. But currently, the Eskom one is at about 25 billion, about 24.5, yeah. Oh yeah, the other question was with regard to Tubatsi. As you know, Tubatsi is still a station that we are still, we just received the approvals to start with that. So the project team is now being assembled. It will definitely be part of the generation because it is a generator, Tubatsi. So we are now in the process of developing that project after we've received the approval now. So we are finalizing all the necessary preparatory work. So we have already appointed the team that is dealing with that project on behalf of Eskom. Yeah, I think, Minister, those were the questions that I could pick up in terms of the generation, and then I think the rest on the other ones are.
No, thank you very much, Heidi, and the rest of the media for those questions. Maybe just to say on the winter outlook, I'm sure Eskom will, at the right time, when we are approaching that, they will make the winter plan public. But at this stage, I'm not in a position to share that because it's something that Eskom is still working on. I'm happy that the team has just highlighted the fact that just on the last update with regards to the consent, I'm happy to indicate that, in fact, even the last one of the lenders has given us a consent late last week. So we've got consent from all 8 of them. So thanks to the team for that reminder. And then with regards to the one question from Helmut in relation to the payments from National Treasury, it's through an established cycle. And I think that Eskom has to satisfy some requirements. So I really don't know when that next payment will be made, but is in terms of the schedule, as it would have been agreed between Eskom and National Treasury. And perhaps in the next briefing, I might be in a position to provide that level of detail. On the standard offer program, the last time I was here, the team had indicated that although there's an oversubscription of 1,130 or so megawatts, I think what has been contracted is something approximately 400 megawatts, and the rest of the remainder, the difference of that is something that is still under discussion. But the point I was making is that there's that over subscription to that program. Of course, then they have to enter the leg of negotiations in relation to the tariff, the time of use, and all of that. It's a conversation that Eskom is leading, and I'm sure once there are substantial changes, I'll be able to come back and share with you and or Eskom, Mr. Marokane and Mr. Kgosientso Ramokgopa, the head of transmission, will be in a position to share that with yourselves. And then in relation to the IRP, as you can imagine, out in the public domain, that process is spearheaded and led by the DMRE. I'm sure the DMRE, Minister Mantashe and DG Mbele will define really what happens of the comments, what are the timelines and all of that. I really don't want to enter a space that does not belong to me. I'm sure that at the right time they will be able to make those announcements. So I'll leave it to DMRE. They will share with the general public on what then happens from the comments, substantial comments that we have received so far, really thoroughly considered, substantiated, and we want to welcome that. I mean, that much I can say. Of course, they will say that themselves, but we have seen some of the people and the issues they are raising. I'm sure that the DMRE will look into those and advise on what then are the next steps. That's a responsibility that sits squarely within the domain of DMRE. Thanks.
Thank you, Minister and Mr. Nxumalo, for the clarity. Colleagues, we will now take our last round of questions. Are there any questions in the room? We've got Heidi.
Sorry, I wasn't clear with my question. It's my fault.
Okay.
I wanted to ask what's left of the diesel budget for this year.
Thank you, Heidi. Any other questions in the room? Okay, if there are no more questions in the room. Takalani or Itumeleng, do you have questions online?
Yes, we do. The first question is from Denise Erasmus from Business Day. The Minister of Electricity has the power to issue determination for the procurement of new generation capacity. Are there any plans to issue such a determination this year, over and above the determination issued to procure 2.5 megawatts nuclear power to help speed up investment in new generation capacity? And the second one is from Helmut, who's from Independent Media. Will the National Council of Provinces pass the ERA bill before the 29th of May 2024? What will the impact be on the municipal revenue of the democratization of electricity supply? And the last question is how much coal delivered to Majuba is now by rail rather than road?
Thank you very much for the questions. We'll again start with Mr. Begin Umalo, who will then be followed by the Minister. Thanks.
Thank you, Tsakani. I think, Heidi, the diesel budget that I've indicated, we currently at 25 versus against the 23.2 where we are. So that's the variance. So we are still within the approved budget currently. This is just for the Eskom fleet as well. And then the second questions that was just asked by Denine is with dealing with Majuba in terms of the coal. Obviously, we have started with the trains for Majuba. It's currently almost 50-50 with the road and also the rail network. We are still busy connecting the MLO side rail network. Once we have got that one, then we will then increase. But Majuba will always stay as a combination of rail and the road transport as well. Yeah, thanks, Minister.
Thanks, Denine, for your questions. And Helmut, maybe just to say the following, Denine, on the determination. I think the approach that we're taking as a ministry is, before we issue the determination, is just to have an appreciation of the state of readiness. I think what we have seen previously was that determinations will be made, takes an inordinate amount of time. So what we're trying to do is to ensure that there's some degree of alignment in the Eskom side, and of course on the new players, there's no one to consult, but just ensuring that when we go out, there's infrastructure, the capacity is available to be able to deliver on those determinations. And just to say to you that it is it's our intention to ensure that even before the conclusion of this administration, we are able to issue new determinations. We are far advanced, I must say, in that exercise. And then Helmut, on the issues around the ERA, I've mentioned that it's gone through the National Assembly, now it's going to the National Council of Provinces. As you can imagine, is a legislative process. There's a separation of the executive and the legislature, so that's it's in the domain, if you like, of the NCOP. But the point I want to make is that we have agreed and prioritized it as one of the priority legislation. So there's consensus between the leader of government business, led by Deputy President Mashatile, and the other arm of the state, the legislature, to say these are the priority pieces of legislation that we want to see approved before the conclusion of the 6th administration. So I'm confident that we are most likely going to see that it's going to pass through the NCOP. I want to qualify that it's an NCOP process, so what happens there, we have no control, but I think there's consensus on that. And then, Helmut, your observations are quite correct in relation to the unintended consequences of the remaking of this energy space on the municipalities' revenue streams, because what we are seeing is that your energy-intensive users, they are the first one to leave, if you like, the municipal supply, and of course to also leave Eskom. They are relying more on transactions with private producers. What that does to municipalities and of course to Eskom is that you are more reliable and big payers are the ones that are first to jump out of this bus, and therefore it just erodes your revenue generating ability. And as you know, how municipalities are configured is that they add a surcharge, that's part of that tariff dispensation, and they use that surcharge, that additional income, to redeploy it to make it possible for them to meet their constitutional obligations. So if you like, if not managed properly, I think there's going to be unintended consequences. What are we doing about that? We are engaging with COGTA, and in this instance, that program is led by Deputy Minister Pakstahu. We have had engagement. So what that seeks to do is to achieve two things. From the National Department of Ministry of, in the Presidency responsible for electricity, our primary preoccupation was about getting new additional generation capacity, megawatts onto the grid, so that we are able to strengthen, if you like, the grid. We are able to ensure that the supply meets demand. And what Minister Tau, DM Tau and COGTA have been doing with Minister Ngadi Meng was to ensure that in the course of doing that, as we see the energy-intensive users seeking alternative forms of supply, we should not undermine the ability of municipalities to continue as going concerns. So essentially, municipalities becoming illiquid and unable to pay, if you like, their obligations and their creditors. So we're bringing all of these things together, the protection of the revenue base of municipalities and also new generation capacity. We have been engaging with SALGA and a number of municipalities as pilot sites. We think that we are cracking it. We should be able to achieve both new generation capacity without undermining the ability of municipalities to sustain themselves from this electricity revenue. At the right time, myself and COGTA will be able to, and SALGA also, share with the general public on what that solution is. Of course, it's also anchored on the ability of the municipality to deliver, if you like, on their side of the bargain, and that's why we have isolated pilot municipalities that we think where they stand, they've got the greatest prospect of ensuring that we are able to roll out this seamlessly, and we are able to use them as demonstration sites that we can achieve both. And once we get it right, we'll be able to export this template to other parts of the country, or if you like, other municipalities, so that municipalities continue to be financially resilient. They are able to meet their constitutional obligation whilst we are resolving the energy crisis in the country. But once more, thank you very much for making time. Like I said, as the President said, is that while within touching distance, we can see the end is inside. We have turned the corner. Of course, there will be moments of temporary setbacks, reversals, but those are not permanent. We are able to come back quicker and ensure that we continue on the path of ensuring that the trend line continues to go down. But for us to be able to confidently resolve this problem is around new generation capacity, and we have shared with you some of the interventions and the reforms that have been introduced to allow private sector participation, in addition to that question on expanding, if you like, the transmission. We have had a very productive engagement with the board of the NTCSA. We are at one of what are the underlying principles that should inform the modernization and the accelerated rollout of transmission. They are going to take that conversation into a formal board discussion. Once they resolve, we come together, we should be able to announce to the country, if you like, the next steps on how we're going to resolve this question going forward. But there are concrete proposals that have been sitting, has been placed before them. They've been also considering other options. We are weaving those together so that it can be, if you like, a joint approach on how we're going to resolve this question going forward. So Thank you very much and wish you a blessed Easter later in the week. Thank you.
With that, colleagues, we have come to the end of today's media briefing. Once again, thank you for your attendance and the coverage. And if there are any further inquiries, please do feel free to share those with myself. My details are on the GCIS platforms where we issued the media advisory. So yes, indeed, thank you, colleagues. Thank you to the Minister and colleagues from Eskom.